Good evening, this is Making the Case. I'm Yodit Tewolde. We begin tonight with the sentencing of former Minnesota police officer Kim Potter. She was convicted in December on manslaughter charges for killing 20-year-old Daunte Wright. She claims she mistakenly fired her gun instead of her taser during a traffic stop last April. Potter was sentenced to 24 months. 16 of those months will be served in prison and the remaining 8 months on supervised release. An emotional Potter addressed the court before sentencing and apologized to the Wright family. Take a look.
I am so sorry that I hurt you so badly. My heart is broken and devastated for all of you. I pray for Daunte and all of you many times a day. He is not more than one thought away from my heart, and I have no right for that.
Here to help unpack today's sentencing is former prosecutors Paul Henderson, who's also BNC's legal contributor, and Bianca Forde. All right, guys, let's start with your reaction to today's sentencing. I'll reserve my comments until after. So, Paul, you first.
All right. So, first of all, let me say, I'm very concerned. Of course, we saw the waterworks, and of course, she's sorry. But the whole point of it is distinguishing between an accident and a mistake. And mistakes have consequences. The consequences that we have is another dead African-American unarmed man. And the cost for that, and literally I talk about it as a cost and a value, because we've determined what that is by this sentencing, and it is 2 years, which is only 16 months of custody with good behavior. Prosecution was asking for 7 years, and for me, as an African-American man, that cost does not add up to the value of the death for this mistake that was not an accident, but was a tragedy. And I think we expected more, and we wanted more as a community. To me, this whole thing is summarized. It's interesting to me that while we're having this conversation about qualified immunity that has stalled the George Floyd bill, we're seeing with this sentence a transactional immunity that determined what the value and cost was for this killing. And that's a shame. That's why we all have to work harder. That's why I wanted to see more. I'm disappointed for the sentence for that reason, and because I want to see more changes and I want to see more and broader accountability. That's my gut reaction.
Bianca.
Yeah, my gut reaction is the entire proceeding just seemed like an uncanny display, an unusual display of compassion for someone who had just been sentenced or was in the process of being sentenced for taking someone's life. And it actually brought me back to the Amber Guyger trial, where the white police officer walks into Parkland, and then in the course of sentencing, the sentencing judge comes down, and again, an unusual display of compassion, gives Amber Guyger a hug. So, to me, what today was just another reminder that it's not that our system lacks the ability to be empathetic or compassionate. It's just extremely selective in who gets to enjoy the benefits of that compassion. And I completely agree with what Paul just said, because, when you look at how Judge Chu went through the analysis of the mitigating factors versus the aggravating factors, it is clear that our system has a bias for the white, the rich, the privileged, and in some cases, the educated. And in this particular case, there was a value that was placed on Kim Potter's future that was not placed on Daunte Wright's lost life. And that is really frustrating and really, really just infuriating, to be frank.
I mean, so many people came out on Twitter, on social media in general, to talk about their own sentences that they've gotten for doing so much less. And the comparison, I mean, was just, it's incredible. And it's, you guys have practiced, I've practiced, and I've seen first-time drug offenders serve more time. And there wasn't a person who lost their life in the process. And so, again, making those comparisons is just, it's incredible. Let's talk about Minnesota state guidelines or sentencing guidelines, Paul. We got to make this make sense for people. I know people are like thinking, listen, how do you kill somebody and only get 2 years, 16 months in prison, and the rest being served on probation. Minnesota's guidelines, they say that for a crime such as this, and for someone who has no prior criminal history, that the judge has discretion to sentence that individual roughly between 6 and 8.5 years. The judge here went, a complete departure down from that sentencing range, Paul. So can you make sense for people who just don't understand why she did that?
Yeah, certainly. So the range is 6 to 8 years. That's the spread. What prosecutors were asking for in this case was 7 years. And what the judge did, because she has to balance on the record both mitigating and aggravating factors. In this case specifically, what she articulated and unpacked to the audience was that what she evaluated and the standards for this case for why someone would serve custody time were 4 issues: retribution, incapacitation, deterrence, and rehabilitation. She found, and this is the record that she made, that the only issue served by sentencing in custody time was retribution. And that in and of itself still diminished the value of Daunte Wright's life, that the retribution that she thought would be appropriate would be this 2-year sentence. And again, it's not even a full 2 years, because with good behavior, you serve 2/3 of the time, which means she will be in custody for 16 months, and the final 8 months will be out of custody, but on parole. So that's how she got to the sentence, and all of the things that we said before about the disproportionality. And the bigger issue, let's just put a flag in this right now, the race disparate outcomes based on the sentencing is the ultimate issue here. And that to me is what's significant, and that's what's inappropriate. And that's why this is such a frustrating issue in terms of what the sentences was that does not fit the crime and does not match the murder, the death of Daunte Wright.
Let's talk about Kim Potter and those tears during her statements that she made before the court. But she wasn't the only one that was crying. The judge also cried, which was something that we don't see often. Take a look.
Officer Potter made a mistake that ended tragically. She never intended to hurt anyone. Her conduct cries out for a sentence significantly below the guidelines.
Bianca, what did you make of that moment? I mean, listen, this was a tough case. Judges, it's not an easy task, but to be emotional is, from a judge perspective, I mean, it's not something that you see often, because they're supposed to be, removed from the emotions of it all, right? But she wasn't. I mean, she's human. So what did you make of that moment?
I'll tell you, in my first 3 months as a prosecutor, I had a really egregious case. And during the government's allocution, I actually started to cry. I had to pass my file to a colleague because I couldn't get through the sentencing. And afterwards, the judge called me up to the bench and said, "You don't do that. Regardless of how egregious the facts are, you hold it together." And that was 3 months in. It never happened again. So to see a judge, a lot more senior than I was at that time, and certainly having been a judge for a very long time, to break down in that moment, it was very unusual and atypical, but also the moment that she chose to break down. It wasn't during the victim impact statements, right? It was almost like it was at the thought of having to send poor Kim Potter to jail or to prison for 24 months. And it just really sort of highlighted again this bias, the way that the system just sort of puts a value on one and devalues the other. So regardless of what the judge was thinking in that moment, maybe she was actually feeling empathy for the family, but we don't know what was going on in her head, right? We can only see the optics, and the optics of it were just not what we needed to see as a community, and definitely not what the family needed to see in that moment. And I'll tell you, I think Daunte Wright's mom said it best. She said, I thought my white tears could match Kim Potter's white tears, and she found out that they couldn't, because what we saw was almost a predilection for police officers. And we take so much effort when it comes to juries to let juries know you cannot favor police officers over lay people. You have to weigh their testimony in the same way. But what we realize we don't do is we don't take as much care to strip prosecutors of those predilections and to strip judges of those predilections. And you could tell from the moment the judge started speaking today, there was all this deference to Kim Potter, 26-year veteran, respected over and above the line of duty. And you didn't hear any of that language when it came to describing the life of Daunte Wright.
I definitely think that that was more of a justification for her sentence, for herself, most certainly. Paul, your thoughts?
It's exactly that. And the two things that stood out to me were, and I think you alluded to this before, the inappropriateness for the judge to react and make a record like that was emotionally based and not logistically, analytically, and legal based was inappropriate and something that I was not expecting. And to the degree I did or we did expect to have an emotional response, it's disappointing to me that that response was not attributed to the victim. That response was not attributed to the family. That emotional response was not attributed on behalf of the community, the race disparate community that is affected again and again by outcomes like this, that we already know statistically hurts and harms communities of color with lethal encounters with law enforcement. It was inappropriate. And on that basis, it was offensive because we only saw it bestowed upon the transactional immunity as associated with this sentence with law enforcement. That's what's frustrating about it. And that's what stands out about it to me. But again, this should be something that's motivating all of us to work that much harder for the administrative accountability to make sure that we don't have more of this in the future. That's the real concern and that's the real issue.
Let's talk about Kim Potter's tears. I mean, that was something that we saw her do when she took the stand in her trial, and we talked about her tears in that body cam video when she realized that she actually shot someone and killed them, and how genuine that they are. And Daunte's mom called those tears today into question because, again, what Bianca stated a while ago, Daunte's mom thought that her white woman tears would be good enough today. She realizes that that is one of the concerns in our legal system, is that white women tears trump justice. And so she said the difference between her white tears and Kim Potter's is that hers were true and genuine. Did we believe in the sincerity of Kim's tears today? I can tell you, for one, I do not believe them, because as soon as she was convicted and went to, check into the facility, the jail facility, her book-in photo was so condescending, so disrespectful. So at that point, I didn't believe anything about Kim Potter. Bianca, your thoughts?
I think the totality of the circumstances put her tears into question. Right when the shooting happened, her first thought was, "Oh my goodness, what's going to happen to me?" And I thought that Daunte Wright's mom today,
Correct,
during her victim impact statement, noted that brilliantly, right? No, don't not go help him. Please make sure he's okay. I'm going to go to jail. So today, yes, anyone can cry at a sentencing when they are looking at time in prison. I wasn't convinced, and the family certainly was not.
Paul, quickly.
They seem self-serving to me. Had I been the prosecutor, I would have pointed that out because I think that that's important to know. Again,
Yes.
when the only cared about what was going to happen to her. And that booking photo where we saw her after being charged with murder for killing an unarmed black man that was her fault, she's smiling for the camera. I don't care what you say, that's the image that sticks with me. It frustrates me about what happened with this sentencing. And again, this whole thing about being a tragic mistake is more than that. If you can tell the difference between your gun and a taser, then you shouldn't carry either.
You know what? You brought up a really interesting point. I'm so surprised that the prosecution didn't bring that up. That book-in photo. The only person that did, I believe, was Daunte's brother in his victim impact statement. So, Bianca Forde, thank you as usual for your time and insight tonight. Appreciate you.